This is CBS. The Presidential Inauguration. This portion of Inauguration Day is sponsored by the...
A shock, a seismic difference. Said one of the new freshmen, one of the freshmen who I talked to a couple of days ago, he said that campaign rhetoric tends to be simplistic. You have to look at things differently when you get down here. I'm sure they are.
That's very easy, as Ronald Reagan has found out, to do all kinds of things during the campaign season, Walter. It becomes much more difficult during the transition period. Andy Rooney talking a while ago about reducing the size of the federal government. That was Mr. Reagan's aim, of course, and yet one of the things that's been a bit of an embarrassment to him since coming to Washington is the ballooning size of his transition office. 6 or 7 floors of people there. They ran over the budget. We'll have to solicit private donations to make up the difference. I'm told the line for people who are lining up to give donations to that is one of the shortest lines. There's no wait if you want to give.
You know, we're talking about the freshmen in Congress. It's an interesting contrast, too, that the oldest president ever to be inaugurated in this country will be Ronald Reagan. But the average age of the Congress is at its lowest point in our history. The average in the House is down to 48. Just 10 years ago it was almost 52. The Senate average is down to 52.3, I think. 10 years ago it was 56.5. Only the Supreme Court is older.
You know, Walter, you're also really going to be one of the different things this time. You know, we all grew up with the Democrats owning Capitol Hill. This was their part of town, whoever had the White House. And now the Republicans have the Senate, and there are enough of those new Republicans in the House where if you line up a few conservative Democrats, they will have control. And there's a whole generation of reporters grew up never knowing that.
I think the Senate is going to be the most interesting place in town, Walter. You know, I'm told on election night that Howard Baker, they were talking about he would now have 53 seats in the majority, and he said no, 51 seats and 2 cages. He wouldn't tell us which of those new members he thought would require the cages. We won't speculate on that.
But you know, even more than the reporters covering a story that they have never covered before, the Congress themselves, by this fact of their youthful age, means that the average birth date for them is 1931. So that you've gotten down to the point now, finally, that the Congress of the United States really did not know the Depression, the average that is, really did not know World War II. Their experience is limited to post-World War II years in their adult life. It's got to affect their thinking and their outlook in some way. We have some more news from Tehran. The Iranian news agency Pars, still toying with us, I'm afraid, reported the departure of the hostages is imminent, and then reported at 11 o'clock this morning Eastern Time, 15 minutes ago, that they would fly out within the next half hour. And that would be another 15 minutes from now. We keep getting those reports. And now the AP is saying again that Iranian officials have said that one of the Algerian planes has left the airport and that the second would be prepared for takeoff. A report actually we had a few minutes ago, but not from an Iranian official. The presidential motorcade moving now off of Pennsylvania Avenue onto Constitution Avenue, passing the couple of labor union headquarters. Carpenters are there, coming up the hill, which makes this Capitol Hill, at Constitution Avenue. They have about 3 or 4 blocks to go before they turn then in front of the Capitol building itself. They'll pull up into what is called the Law Library entrance, which is a small door, as all the doors are in the east side of the Capitol. You've always wondered how anybody get out of these buildings, except through the windows. If anything ever happened, the doors are so tiny. But they're coming in the Law Library entrance, then into the rotunda and on to the holding rooms. They don't go through the rotunda right at the beginning, but into holding rooms, then out and onto this platform.
It's a strange term, isn't it? It's a Secret Service term, I guess is how it came in, the holding room. It's where they bring a president when they're waiting for a ceremony to officially begin. One time during the Ford administration, Walter, President Ford was going to hold a news conference out on the lawn of the White House. So instead of having a holding room, they designated a tree the holding tree. And the president came and stood there at the holding tree until it was time to go on. Still known to this day as the holding tree.
That's, I don't know where our camera is, but we've made Capitol Hill look a lot steeper than it is. I live up here, this is my neighborhood, and it really is quite a gentle little hill. That looks, you know, as if you could...
Looks like it was made for tobogganing.
Yeah, they have a pretty good time.
It's a pretty good crowd out today, Walter. Normally, you remember in inaugurations past, generally when it's so cold, the crowd won't begin to form up this soon. It will by the time the parade starts, but last year I recall when President Ford and Mr. Carter were coming up Pennsylvania Avenue in the limousines, there were very few people along the route.
Yeah, they hold out to the last minute for the parade itself.
It was colder 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Nice out today.
A great deal colder. This is an absolutely delightful day so far with the temperature in the 50s. It hadn't been this warm in 50 years. Lyndon Johnson's was the closest, and that was around 47, I think. Lem Tucker's outside the Law Library entrance we were referring to, the entrance into the Capitol. The presidential party's arrival, they're turning in now, you see, to the avenue there in front of the Capitol on the east side, and Lem Tucker's there. Lem?
Walter, the first segment of the motorcade, that is the motorcycle escort, the television trucks escorting the motorcade, has arrived here at the Law Library. This, of course, is the east front of the Capitol, home of all the former Capitol Hill, Capitol building inaugurations, this being the first one on the side of the building where you are. This is officially the back of the Capitol, and they will go in a small door here, as Walter said. All the doors here are small, called the Law Library. There is no law library here. It used to be until the Supreme Court moved back in the 1860s. We now see the car with President Carter, President-elect Reagan, Secret Service men, and the traditional running along the side when the car is moving this slowly, coming right here now down a small driveway off the main parking lot, coming up to this underground entrance. They will be met here by the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate, the Sergeant at Arms of the House, the Honor Guard now called to attention, the rear door being opened, and President Carter on the right side here, President-elect Reagan waving to the small crowd. You can hear some applause, and coming around to join President Carter. Thomas Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, and Senator Mark Hatfield, who heads the Inauguration Committee for the Republicans, escorting the two men. And it's just that fast. They have gotten out of the cars, passed under this small portico, and both Mr. Reagan and Mr. Carter are now officially inside the United States Capitol. Mrs. Reagan, dressed in a lovely sort of rose red dress with Rosalind Carter, escorted by Senator Robert Byrd, now the minority leader of the House. They are entering and vanishing inside the Capitol. We have the other people now, Vice President Mondale and Vice President-elect George Bush. Mr. Mondale walking by, and then rather traditionally, Vice President Mondale giving a thumbs up to reporters and smiling. Someone asked him if he could tell us anything, and he just sort of said no, not at this point, kept smiling, walking ahead. See Mrs. Bush, Mrs. Mondale trailing along behind, and now they too, with the Vice President still chatting. Now Howard Baker joining him, Majority Leader of the House, Mr. Wright, all disappearing inside the Capitol, where the inaugural ceremonies will begin not too long from now. The entrance back here was so small that at one point this morning, some of the honor guard that had come in to be ready sort of got lodged in the door, but that's over. Well, Walter, they are inside the Capitol, and before long you'll be seeing them, and it's back to you.
Okay, Lem will be picking you up again as the new President of the United States emerges from that east side for a military review, and then the motorcade back to the White House and the parade. The dignitaries have gathered around the podium now, for the most part, waiting for the next official entry, that of the soon-to-be former Vice President, who will enter shortly. The dignitaries have gathered to say Phil Jones is there to tell us who they are. Phil?
Well, Walter, it's, as you can see, getting rather crowded here on the inaugural platform. Inside, you can see about 400 people who are fairly close, very close to the Reagan family, about 100 members of the family and close friends. Then you have the ranking members of the Senate and House who are here, as well as members of the Supreme Court. Also, you have the people who will be serving in the Reagan administration cabinet who are inside. Then on the outside, you have the overflow crowd, primarily the rest of the members of the House of Representatives who have come for this occasion today, and from the Senate. Everybody here is, of course, waiting for the Vice President to arrive, and then that, of course, followed by the President and the soon-to-be President for the 12 noon swearing-in ceremony. But frankly, everybody here is really wondering what's going on in Iran. You see Senator Kennedy and this Senator Richard Schweiker, who will be serving in the Reagan cabinet. Mr. Schweiker, who was Ronald Reagan's running mate, or would have been his running mate, had Mr. Reagan got the nomination back in 1976. Walter?
We're grasping at any straws here this morning on the hostage departure from Iran, and we have a policeman at the airport is quoted as having said now that the hostages have taken off. A policeman at the airport. I wouldn't take that one as official quite yet, but that has been given to us by the Associated Press. The AP goes on to say that the plane did take off. Iranian officials now have told a reporter, but it's still not known precisely that. We'll wait official word, but the word from the Associated Press now quotes an Iranian official that the plane with the hostages has taken off from Iran airport. The outgoing First Lady, the incoming First Lady have just come down the steps onto the inaugural platform. Mrs. Nancy Reagan and Mrs. Carter taking their seats. They'll be beside their husbands. The vice presidential wives, Mrs. Mondale and Mrs. Bush, preceded them to their seats and stand, and the inaugural ceremony is really practically underway. In just a moment, the Senator Hatfield, who is the chairman of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee, will be coming down the stairs to open the ceremony. Of course, before then, Vice President-elect Bush will enter. That will be any second now. Then President-elect Reagan. We have from our CBS News sources in Tehran a story that no planes have yet taken off, despite a report by the Associated Press quoting an Iranian official saying that the plane bearing the hostages had left. We had that about 3 or 4 minutes ago. CBS News sources say that is not the case. Back on the inaugural platform, Mrs. Reagan with her family gathered around her are now awaiting the arrival of the president and the president-elect. I don't know what that siren is we hear in the background. The Marine Band is still playing out in front of the platform here. Somewhere into our microphones, an open microphone somewhere, we hear a siren. But there's no indication that there's any problem up here in Capitol Hill. You see Mrs. Reagan awaiting the arrival of the president. At Andrews Air Force Base, Rita Flynn may have something for us. Rita?
Walter, the special State Department group that has been out here since about 10 o'clock was waiting in a VIP lounge until we're told they got a cue from the White House to board the plane that you see behind me. Not this one that's moving right in front, but the one behind it that will take them to Frankfurt. This is a support group. They have just moved out of the VIP lounge and are standing on the tarmac. A group of about 30 people, and appear to be preparing to board this plane. Now, once again, we were told these people would not be leaving the VIP lounge until they heard some word from the White House, until they were given a cue, and it appears they have been given some sort of a cue.
Back here at the inaugural platform, where you see there in Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Bush, waiting the arrival of the president-elect.
They'll be coming out, Walter, with a congressional...
Here they are. We see them coming down the steps. There's the president and Vice President Mondale and Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Excuse me, Bruce.
No, I was just saying, Congressman, wasn't this Jim Wright, the majority leader behind that?
This is President-elect Reagan and the chairman of the committee, Mr. Hatfield, and John Rhodes, who is the outgoing minority leader of the House of Representatives. He is now the former, I suppose. We have the new Congress in session now.
That shot, Walter, is, I think, in that little reception room. They use it for House and Senate conferees. It was part of the new East Wing construction a few years back where Governor Reagan is waiting. Since the protocol says he's the last one to come. Sorry.
They're running just a little bit behind the schedule that had been announced earlier. President-elect Reagan was supposed to have been entering onto the platform right at this specific moment with the herald trumpets sounding, 14 trumpeters and a couple of drummers from the U.S. Army herald trumpets. But for some reason, a delay. I wonder what that could be about. Here we are.
President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and the Vice President, Walter Mondale.
Whether you could hear or not, but President Carter was just asked if the hostages are out, and he responded saying, "Not yet, not yet."
You know,
Walter, again, I don't know whether you could hear as President Carter entered or not, but he was asked whether or not the hostages were out, and his response as he walked by was, "Not yet."
Something like that.
Apparently that's the story. CBS has been told that the planes have not left the airport as yet. I thought I noted, Bruce and Bob, there a moment ago that Mrs. Carter seems rather grim at this moment. We've been told throughout this transition that she took the defeat much harder than the president himself and has really hardly recovered from it. It was thought that she had kind of brightened up a bit in the last couple of weeks, but she doesn't look very, very happy today.
Well, I suppose it's just one more straw, you know. You absolutely want to go out on a high note, and the high note was getting those people back. And, you know, it's one more thing that went wrong.
Right.
It's an interesting thing that Rita Flynn reported from out at Andrews Air Force Base a moment ago, that the people there in the State Department team had been told would not be leaving there until they had had some cue from the White House, and indeed Rita said that they were preparing to leave. But yet, as Phil Jones just reported, Mr. Carter said the hostages are not out yet. So as it has been so much of the time, Walter, we simply don't know. We follow
Here's
the
new Vice President of the United States, George Bush, 57 years old, successful oil operator from Midland and Houston, Texas. Fought hard for the presidential nomination, but and went right down to the last of the primaries in a valiant effort. He thought that he had unseated the favored candidacy of Ronald Reagan in the Iowa primary, the first in the nation, but from there on out, from New Hampshire on, it was downhill for him. He then accepted the vice presidential nomination handed to him by the president-elect at Detroit in that dramatic night when it was thought that Gerald Ford might be the running mate for a brief time. George Bush had already given up and was in his pajamas at his hotel when the phone call came that Ronald Reagan wanted him as his running mate. He accepted with, I think the word would be, alacrity.
Mr. Ford didn't come to the inauguration this year, did he?
No, he did not, nor did the other living ex-president, Richard Nixon. And Mr. Ford said, with the graciousness that is his, that he did not want to upstage the day for Ronald Reagan. And there is some other talk also that there was a feeling that if he came and Richard Nixon did not, then the Nixon absence would be even more noteworthy, and they didn't want that either. Here is Ronald Reagan.
You were talking a while ago,
Last
Walter,
few minutes as a civilian.
talking a while ago about how much younger the Congress is now. You know, Mr. Carter is going to be one of the youngest ex-presidents that we've had in quite some time.
Indeed he is, which gives him many years of activity, which will be his to decide upon, of course. Says he's going to lecture, teach, write his memoirs, but nothing planned beyond that. Fish, of course, as he likes to do, and hunt. But he may be in the position of...
Let's go.
Of some of the other young exitees, is there such a word, from this high office. He may get again into public service. Hoover, you remember, many years a publisher, wrote 14 books, I think, or something like that, but he did some major studies on world food problems, on governmental reorganization. He's the most recent who has been that active.
Mr. Carter, of course, has talked about doing religious work from time to time, and I suppose well, maybe that's what he'll turn to.
It could happen, of course.
Remember 4 years ago, Gerald Ford left this inauguration and went directly to a golf tournament.
Yes. Well, it appears that President Carter will not be going directly to any such restful retreat as that. He is scheduled to be named by President Reagan as his delegate to the United Press has sent a flash at 11:35 that the hostages are free. We do not know yet any details of that or whether it's official.
President Reagan, of course, would have paid the UPI bulletin. I think they'd be cheering that outside here, too, Walter.
Well, except for that old lady who was introduced to us earlier down there, I don't know that anybody's tuned in to events in the outside world. Certainly all eyes now are on the inaugural platform and the arrival there of Ronald Wilson Reagan, native of Illinois, resident of California, to be the 40th President of the United States. The United Press is now giving some details, although it seems to be written simply from the flash they got earlier. Tehran airport officials are the ones they are quoting as to the fact that the hostages have taken off after 440 days of captivity, 444 days of captivity. That's still a United Press report. We do not have that officially from Iran or from the United States government. We had an earlier report by the Associated Press, which did not seem to be true, quoting a policeman and then an official that they had taken off.
Mark Hatfield, Chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee.
And here the ceremony begins.
Will present the program.
Welcome to the historic first inauguration under the panoply of the West Front of our nation's capital. The 40th President of the United States takes his oath of office in a day when a tide of new hope is rising throughout our land. As an affirmation of this new hope, let us all join Michael Ryan of the United States Marines in singing a verse of America the Beautiful. Will you all join and reach out and grasp the hand of your neighbor, and let this be a symbol of our unity.
There certainly is a first. This mass singing to open it, America the Beautiful. a tune which the President and President-elect and Mrs. Reagan frequently have said and we have noted brings tears to their eyes.
Beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, and burn thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in
Please be seated. This new hope is not promoted in lyricism, but is tough and realistic hope, which is the instinct of the soul, the energizer of the mind. For our invocation today, I present President-elect and Mrs. Reagan's pastor, the Reverend Don Mumma of the Bel Air Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles. Will you please stand?
That, of course, Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon, the chairman of the Joint Congressional Inaugural Committee, is presiding. And here is the Reverend Mr. Mumma.
Wherever you might be, here and in the United States and around the world, please bow with me in this moment of solemn dedication and prayer. Gracious God our Father, we need you today, maybe as never before. We have not lived up to our personal or national potential. We have seen our world from our own selfish, parochial point of view. We have lived as though everything depended upon us. We confess our sin and seek your forgiveness. In this historic moment, we would pray for our President-elect, Ronald Reagan. May he see himself as one who has been called by you to lead this country. May he take very seriously his accountability to you and do all he can to walk in your truth, run with patience the race that is set before him, and stand mature and wholly devoted to doing your will. Grant him a steady peace, a brave and compassionate heart, a single desire to always be quick to give you all the praise and the honor and glory. Help and encourage Mrs. Reagan and the children in these days. Teach them, O God, to understand that with responsibility comes sacrifice, and with leadership comes loneliness. May they all find their companionship in you, O God. We also pray for Vice President-elect George Bush, the cabinet, and all others who are in positions of leadership in this new administration. May they measure well the shortness of time and the length of eternity. May they see all people and things and nations from your point of view. We thank you, O God, for this moment of commitment. Give to all of us as a nation enough hard times to keep us humble and humane, enough tasks beyond our own abilities to keep us ever dependent upon you, enough joys and accomplishments to keep us pressing on and gloriously happy as we serve you together. We thank you, O God, for the release of the hostages and for all of those who have made this moment possible. And so in this moment of new beginnings, our hearts beat with a cadence of pride in our country and hope in its future. Help us to stand proudly as American citizens and face every challenge with a confidence born of your spirit and humbly touched by your love and grace. So to this end we commit ourselves, and to this end we pray. In the name of the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, even Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Please be seated.
The oath is now given to
My
Vice
fellow
President-elect
citizens,
George Bush. It'll be
will you
given by
please join
Justice
me at
Potter
this
Stewart by
time
his request.
in wishing good health and happiness to President and Mrs. Carter and to Vice President and Mrs. Mondale.
I think that Mark Hatfield is departing from tradition and conducting a program of his own, in effect, here with these marks the opening song, and now this little tribute to the outgoing president and the vice president.
I now present the Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Honorable Potter Stewart, who will administer the oath of office to the Vice President-elect.
As I say, George Bush asked for Potter Stewart as an old friend from college days and on beyond in their lives. And this is the family Bible being held by Mrs. Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office.
The duties of the office.
On which I am about to enter.
On which I am about to enter.
So help you God.
So help me God.
God bless you, George.
The band plays Hail Columbia, traditional musical tribute to the Vice President. That oath of office, by the way, for the Vice President is about twice as long as that to the President itself. Presidential oath, only 35 words. These oaths are the only part of this entire ceremony that is dictated by the Constitution. Nothing else is, no part of the procedure, simply that they shall take these oaths which are in the Constitution.
Nobody's ever passed up a chance to give a speech, so.
No, not since Mr. Washington first did his, Federal Hall in New York.
The United States Marine Band will now play our national hymn, God of Our Fathers.
That wasn't in the official program as it was handed me. I don't think that we were going to have a brief band concert at Band Tune at that particular moment. That perhaps they planned it.
I have one schedule here that had the hymn coming before Vice President Bush took the oath, but I don't know.
I think that maybe they got a little out of order. It may have something to do with the fact they were proceeding along at a pace which would have put the oath-taking maybe a little ahead of 12 o'clock, and that would be cheating Mr. Carter in an unfortunate final couple of minutes of his presidency. There's nothing that, there's been a lot of dispute. Well, you've read all that history and been a part of it as much as I, that long-held dispute about whether the president really has to take the oath at 12 o'clock precisely. It says that the term expires or begins at 12 o'clock precisely, but it's never been clear whether he has to take the oath to really become the president. Most of the constitutional experts and lawyers don't believe that the taking of the oath really has anything to do with it. He becomes president at noon, whether he takes the oath or not. But nobody wants to test it. It could lead to an awful situation if he took the oath at sometime afternoon. Something happened in that little interregnum there, and it became a court case. So they don't want to really test it, and so everybody tries to make it as near noon as possible. And of course, there have been some cases in the past where they rush around and take the oath way in advance of that hour, just to be sure that there are no skullduggery in high places or that there isn't some problem with security.
Raises an interesting point that if the clock does indeed take precedence over the oath, then you might have a president in office who had not sworn to uphold the Constitution. Wouldn't be obligated to uphold the Constitution until he took the oath.
Right. In the Tilden-Hayes dispute, Hayes won the electoral vote. Tilden won the popular vote. And there was a lot of dispute about whether Hayes really had wanted and who was entitled to it under those circumstances. And Hayes sneaked around and took the oath a day early, just so that Tilden couldn't possibly sneak in and take the oath and claim that he was the President of the United States.
Took it twice, I guess, didn't he?
By the way, that's a terrific picture of the Washington Cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral, which has got to be, what, 3 miles from here, 4 miles from here, another hill.
Way out
and
northwest.
That picture is taken from a camera right up here on the roof of the Capitol. Incredible picture.
One of the highest points in the district, the National Cathedral.
One of the reasons this city is as pretty as is the height limit. As you know, you can't build skyscrapers, and so buildings like the cathedral can dominate a landscape in a way that would just never work in New York, for instance.
Some picture.
The next order of business is the swearing in of Ronald Reagan, and I suppose this slight delay is to bring that as close to noon as possible.
The Chief Justice of the United States.
It's going to come a couple of minutes early.
The Honorable Warren Burger, who will administer the oath of office to the President-elect.
This will be the fourth oath administered by Chief Justice Burger because of that rapid turnover of presidents with Nixon and then Ford and then Carter.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
May I congratulate you, sir.
11:59. Ronald Reagan became the 40th President of the United States. The Constitution says he'll become the President in another minute. He added, "So help me God." That's not part of the formal Constitution requirement of that oath. It has been added by most of the president's recent memory.
The oath, I'm sure you know, Walter, on a Bible that his mother owned, and a Bible which contains a poem that she wrote, a sonnet she wrote.
Gun salute by the salute gun platoon of the 3rd Infantry Regiment based here in Washington. The inaugural address, we're told to run about 15 minutes, around 2,000 words, written by the President himself, we're told.
The President of the United States.
He wrote this on a legal-size yellow pad with a pencil on a flight from Washington to Los Angeles, January 8th, we're told, and there have been very few changes made since then.
Thank you.
It'll be about the same length as President Carter's address, we're told, about 15 minutes.
Senator Hatfield, Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. President, Vice President Bush, Vice President Mondale, Senator Baker, Speaker O'Neill, Reverend Mumma, and my fellow citizens. To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Mr. President, I want our fellow citizens to know how much you did to carry on this tradition. By your gracious cooperation in the transition process, you have shown a watching world that we are a united people, pledged to maintaining a political system which guarantees individual liberty to a greater degree than any other. And I thank you and your people for all your help in maintaining the continuity which is the bulwark of our republic. The business of our nation goes forward. These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions. We suffer from the longest and one of the worst sustained inflations in our national history. It distorts our economic decisions, penalizes thrift, and crushes the struggling young and the fixed-income elderly alike. It threatens to shatter the lives of millions of our people. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, human misery, and personal indignity. Those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement and keeps us from maintaining full productivity. But great as our tax burden is, it has not kept pace with public spending. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. To continue this long trend is to guarantee tremendous social, cultural, political, and economic upheavals. You and I, as individuals, can, by borrowing, live beyond our means, but for only a limited period of time. Why then should we think that collectively, as a nation, we're not bound by that same limitation? We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We're going to begin to act beginning today. The economic ills we suffer have come upon us over several decades. They will not go away in days, weeks, or months, but they will go away. They will go away because we, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. From time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. Well, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else? All of us together, in and out of government, must bear the burden. The solutions we seek must be equitable, with no one group singled out to pay a higher price. We hear much of special interest groups. Well, our concern must be for a special interest group that has been too long neglected. It knows no sectional boundaries or ethnic and racial divisions, and it crosses political party lines. It is made up of men and women who raise our food, patrol our streets, man our mines and factories, teach our children, keep our homes, and heal us when we're sick. Professionals, industrialists, shopkeepers, clerks, cabbies, and truck drivers. They are, in short, we the people. This breed called Americans. Well, this administration's objective will be a healthy, vigorous, growing economy that provides equal opportunities for all Americans, with no barriers born of bigotry or discrimination. Putting America back to work means putting all Americans back to work. Ending inflation means freeing all Americans from the terror of runaway living costs. All must share in the productive work of this new beginning, and all must share in the bounty of a revived economy. With the idealism and fair play which are the core of our system and our strength, we can have a strong and prosperous America at peace with itself and the world. So as we begin, let us take inventory. We are a nation that has a government, not the other way around. And this makes us special among the nations of the earth. Our government has no power except that granted it by the people. It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people. All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. Now, so there will be no misunderstanding, it's not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work. Work with us, not over us. To stand by our side, not ride on our back. Government can and must provide opportunity, not smother it. Foster productivity, not stifle it. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much, prospered as no other people on earth, it was because here in this land we unleashed the energy and individual genius of man to a greater extent than has ever been done before. Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth. The price for this freedom at times has been high, but we have never been unwilling to pay that price. It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives that result from unnecessary and excessive growth of government. It is time for us to realize that we're too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams. We're not, as some would have us believe, doomed to an inevitable decline. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. So with all the creative energy at our command, let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look. You can see heroes every day going in and out of factory gates. Others, a handful in number, produce enough food to feed all of us and then the world beyond. You meet heroes across a counter, and they're on both sides of that counter. There are entrepreneurs with faith in themselves and faith in an idea who create new jobs, new wealth, and opportunity. They're individuals and families who take taxes support the government and whose voluntary gifts support church, charity, culture, art, and education. Their patriotism is quiet but deep. Their values sustain our national life. Now, I have used the words they and their in speaking of these heroes. I could say you and your, because I'm addressing the heroes of whom I speak, you, the citizens of this blessed land. Your dreams, your hopes, your goals are going to be the dreams, the hopes, and the goals of this administration, so help me God. We shall reflect the compassion that is so much a part of your makeup. How can we love our country and not love our countrymen? And loving them, reach out a hand when they fall, heal them when they're sick, and provide opportunity to make themselves sufficient so they will be equal in fact and not just in theory. Can we solve the problems confronting us? Well, the answer is an unequivocal and emphatic yes. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, I did not take the oath I've just taken with the intention of presiding over the dissolution of the world's strongest economy. In the days ahead, I will propose removing the roadblocks that have slowed our economy and reduced productivity. Steps will be taken aimed at restoring the balance between the various levels of government. Progress may be slow, measured in inches and feet, not miles, but we will progress. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise. On the eve of our struggle for independence, a man who might have been one of the greatest among the founding fathers, Dr. Joseph Warren, President of the Massachusetts Congress, said to his fellow Americans, "Our country is in danger, but not to be despaired of. On you depend the fortunes of America. You are to decide the important question upon which rests the happiness and the liberty of millions yet unborn. Act worthy of yourselves." Well, I believe we, the Americans of today, are ready to act worthy of ourselves, ready to do what must be done to ensure happiness and liberty for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. And as we renew ourselves here in our own land, we will be seen as having greater strength throughout the world. We will again be the exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for those who do not now have freedom. To those neighbors and allies who share our freedom, we will strengthen our historic ties and assure them of our support and firm commitment. We will match loyalty with loyalty. We will strive for mutually beneficial relations. We will not use our friendship to impose on their sovereignty, for our own sovereignty is not for sale. As for the enemies of freedom, those who are potential adversaries, they will be reminded that peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever. Our forbearance should never be misunderstood. Our reluctance for conflict should not be misjudged as a failure of will. When action is required to preserve our national security, we will act. We will maintain sufficient strength to prevail if need be, knowing that if we do so, we have the best chance of never having to use that strength. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors. I'm told that tens of thousands of prayer meetings are being held on this day. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free. It would be fitting and good, I think, if on each inaugural day in future years, it should be declared a day of prayer. This is the first time in our history that this ceremony has been held, as you've been told, on this west front of the Capitol. Standing here, one faces a magnificent vista opening up on this city's special beauty and history. At the end of this open mall are those shrines to the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Directly in front of me, the monument to a monumental man, George Washington, father of our country, a man of humility who came to greatness reluctantly. He led America out of revolutionary victory into infant nationhood. Off to one side, the stately memorial to Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence flames with his eloquence. And then beyond the reflecting pool, the dignified columns of the Lincoln Memorial. Whoever would understand in his heart the meaning of America will find it in the life of Abraham Lincoln. Beyond those monuments to heroism is the Potomac River, and on the far shore, the sloping hills of Arlington National Cemetery with its row upon row of simple white markers bearing crosses or stars of David. They add up to only a tiny fraction of the price that has been paid for our freedom. Each one of those markers is a monument to the kind of hero I spoke of earlier. Their lives ended in places called Belleau Wood, the Argonne, Omaha Beach, Salerno, and halfway around the world on Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Pork Chop Hill, the Chosin Reservoir, and in 100 rice paddies and jungles of a place called Vietnam. Under one such marker lies a young man, Martin Treptow, who left his job in a small-town barber shop in 1917 to go to France with the famed Rainbow Division. There on the Western Front, he was killed trying to carry a message between battalions under heavy artillery fire. We're told that on his body was found a diary. On the flyleaf, under the heading, "My Pledge," he had written these words: "America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure. I will fight cheerfully and do my utmost as if the issue of the whole struggle depended on me alone." The crisis we're facing today does not require of us the kind of sacrifice that Martin Treptow and so many thousands of others were called upon to make. It does require, however, our best effort and our willingness to believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds, to believe that together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you very much. The inaugural address of Ronald Wilson Reagan. At 69, to be 70 early next month. The oldest man ever inaugurated as president, but certainly one whose appearance would defy that description. Native of Tampico, Illinois, graduate of a Eureka College, sportscaster, actor, captain in the U.S. Air Force in domestic service, president of a union.
Will you remain standing, please? The Joint
politics.
Congressional Committee on the Inauguration and all the members of the United States Congress are honored that you have come here for this great occasion today. And as we close now with the benediction offered by Reverend Mumma, that will be followed by the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner by Mrs. Juanita Booker.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace, both now and forevermore. Amen.
Juanita Booker is to sing the Star-Spangled Banner now as in herself an American story. The wife of a butcher in Paso Robles, California, who President Reagan heard sing at a barbecue he attended there and invited her to sing here.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched, it was so gallantly streaming. In the rocket's red blaze, the bombs bursting in air gave through the night that tower flags was still there. Oh, say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave? Oh, the land and all the free
you greet once more our President and Mrs. Reagan?
They will now return to the Capitol building, where now President Reagan will sign the appointments to his cabinet, many of which have already cleared the Senate committees and will be acted on by the Senate sitting in session this afternoon. That will not include Secretary of State Haig, for one. There has been a demand for a debate on his appointment by Senator Lowell Weicker, the Republican of Connecticut. Wants to talk about the Watergate matter, which occupied a great deal of time of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing that appointment. It also will not include Secretary-designee Donovan of the Labor Department. That has been held up by the committee on the information from an informant to the FBI of some labor racketeering involved perhaps with his construction firm in New Jersey. But now the inaugural is over. Ronald Reagan is the 40th President of the United States. After signing those appointments and very possibly officially designating former President Carter as his representative to meet with the hostages in Wiesbaden, he will go on to a luncheon here at the Capitol, then review the honor guard here at the Capitol, which is an innovation, and then the motorcade back to the reviewing stand in front of the White House, and the parade, which we have been told will be one of the shortest recent times, about an hour. So, Bruce Morton and Bob Schieffer, we have heard an address which we were told would be what it was, vintage Reagan, and many of the quotations out of it come right from his campaign speeches. The promise of a new conservatism, certainly in our government, to pare back the federal bureaucracy, return power to the states as nearly as that is possible. And most people who have studied government today don't believe that much of that is possible. As a matter of fact, many of the state governors don't want it back. But he made the promises in good faith. He got applause. I think you told me, Bruce, 8 times. You did the counting. And that would be 1 time more than President Carter in his address 4 years ago, which is about equal length, and 1 time less than President Nixon did in his first inaugural. I don't know who counts those things for any particular purpose. The applause was resounding on a couple of occasions, splattering on others. I think what is significant, of course, here, and it's almost symbolic, that this president faced west. The first man inaugural at the Capitol who was faced in that direction. Most have faced to the east. This man from the west, that is Ambassador Dobrynin, by the way, the Russian ambassador there. And we should say, I guess I have not yet, that we still do not have, that's Elizabeth Taylor, of course, do not have any word. Her husband is a Republican senator from Virginia, but we have no word at all, officially, that the hostages have left Iran. The United Press and the AP have both said at one time or another they have. Reuters has not confirmed that, and we certainly have no official word from anybody to that effect. There is a new Secretary of Defense from California, Caspar Weinberger, who also served in the Nixon administration. But I was saying that the president faced west, and that perhaps is significant. He brings Western values of rugged individualism, rejection of government solutions, tough military posture, suspicion of social programs, all of that into this government. And it is perhaps is a sea change for this government. We're seeing the cabinet members, new ones, departing now from the reviewing stand. That siren keeps sounding over these ceremonies today. We don't know where it comes from, somewhere out in the city. We see down there, just leaving at the bottom of your screen, William French Smith, who is the new Secretary of the Attorney General, rather.
And the Reverend Muma there, who gave the benediction. I thought it was a strong speech. It did the kinds of things that Governor Reagan said he wanted to do. Conservative economic doctrines, less government, power to the states. And maybe the most applause was on his line about being tough abroad. We value peace, but we will never surrender it, I think was what he said. And that seemed to stir the crowd as much as anything. I suppose the hostages, of course, have sort of added to the feeling that the United States wants to be a little belligerent about something somehow. It's been a long, humiliating process for the government.
Follow up really on his speech at the convention, I thought, Walter, where he hit the same two themes, heavy on defense, heavy on economics. And
we're now seeing former President and Mrs. Carter leaving the east side of the White House. Lem Tucker is there. Lem?
Walter, perhaps nothing so symbolizes that transition of power as you see Jimmy Carter with Vice President Mondale, now private citizens come out of this door, which officially the back door of the Capitol, to get into a limousine and go to someone throwing a question at Vice President Mondale. What do you hear on the hostages? He smiled and waved back. Mr. Carter, Vice President, Mrs. Mondale, Rosalind Carter already in the car. This motorcade, which has a number of staff vans and press vans, will go from here to Andrews Air Force Base, where we are told there are some other people on hand to wish the ex-president, now former president, farewell. Standing here at the curb, Robert Byrd, who was majority leader during the Carter administration, now minority leader, another symbol of the transition, the change of power that has taken place in this town. The motorcade now pulling out. You see a few tears actually in some of the Carter staff people who've done advance work for him and worked for him. The sirens, some of the sirens you're hearing now, Walter, are those of this motorcade as James Earl Carter, now the former president, heads home to Plains, and the transition is complete at this point.
At 56, Jimmy Carter, one of the youngest presidents to leave the office, and involuntarily at that, having been defeated, of course, in the election by the man who we saw inaugurated as his successor today. Jimmy Carter is not a wealthy man. He returns to Plains, Georgia, with we're told savings of $300,000 or $400,000, $70,000 pension, initial office expenses of $150,000 a year. We're told he's going to write, teach, lecture, fish and hunt, but he'll have a first and official duty appointed by this new president to represent him at Wiesbaden on the return of the hostages, a word of which we still do not have officially that they have left. Associated Press now has another story that the Iranian news agency Pars has reported the takeoff of the aircraft with the hostages, and that's the nearest thing to an official report we've had yet. The West German embassy in Tehran quoted the Tehran radio as saying that the hostages had flown out of Tehran as well. That's also quoting the Iranian news agency Pars. So we can, I guess, come to that conclusion, that the Iranians, in the last defiance of civilized behavior, waited until the inauguration of President Reagan before letting the hostages go, keeping them waiting an unnecessary 24 hours beyond the unnecessary 444 days. We are 35 minutes into the administration of Ronald Reagan, our 40th President of the United States, an administration that, as U.S. News and World Report says, his supporters hope will find him as the new FDR of the right, redesigning and realigning the nation's economy and politics, but also with the words of Mr. Carter's farewell ringing in his ears, warning against special interests and the entrenched bureaucracy. We'll all see how it goes in the next 4 years. Let's go back now to Dan Rather in New York for an update on the hostage situation. Dan?
Walter, according to our CBS News sources at Tehran Airport, one of the two Algerian jetliners is taxiing, or was just a few moments ago. And the drama on the runway of the Tehran Airport continues as the long agony for the Brave 52 has continued throughout this morning. Now, as best we can make it out, here is where the situation with the American hostages stands at this moment. They remain in Tehran, at least they were up until just a few moments ago, at the airport, apparently moments away from their flight to freedom, a few moments after spending 444 days in captivity. And can you imagine what it must have been like inside that airliner for the hostages this morning? The Algerian plane that is to take them to freedom is said to be on the runway at the airport. It has been there for some time. The 52 hostages are reported aboard. The plane is reported to have been taxiing on the runway, preparing for takeoff, one of the two planes. The other airplane on the runway, but not taxiing. That's according to the Reuters news agency and our own CBS contact at the airport. Walter?
Thank you, Dan. We're waiting now for President Reagan to come out of another one of those holding rooms, and my information was signing a couple of papers, but maybe that's not so. He is now at the reception in the Capitol Rotunda. He was receiving some of his friends who were on the platform with him and some of the dignitaries here. And very shortly after this brief reception, he will go into a luncheon here at the Capitol. The lunch has been traditional over recent inaugurals, although this will be only the second time that we understand that cameras will be inside that luncheon. How long or for what part of the luncheon, we don't know. They were in for the first time in 1953 for the Eisenhower inaugural, and the cameras caught the new president feeding his face, as it were, and not in a very dignified posture. And there was a great deal of criticism of that, and it hasn't been seen, that type of scene, since. What we're going to see of the luncheon, we don't know here. Now, our CBS News intentions are that Bruce Morton and I are going to leave this booth here overlooking the inaugural platform and the Capitol, and we're going back to a studio position from which we will be reporting the motorcade and the parade this afternoon, while Bob Schieffer and Bill Moyers do the honors here at the Capitol for a while longer until the President begins to leave here for the White House.
Reviewing stand at Andrews Air Force Base, where he heard the national anthem played, reviewed the troops. Going over now to shake hands, obviously, with the usually 50, 25 people or so will show up when the President leaves or comes into Andrews Air Force Base, base dependents. Look like a few more than that out there today, but most of the people we're seeing now are news technicians. As usual. It's getting to be quite a large group, isn't it? I was just thinking, watching Mr. Reagan come in and out of those doors today. Bill, every time the President walks out the door, a newsman's there waiting to ask a question. And that seems to be the Reagan style, doesn't it? To hold these kind of mobile mini news conferences. He always stops to chat. President Carter told me once, just after he was elected, one of the differences in being president and running for president, he said, I don't have to stop and answer as many questions anymore. But he's obviously going into the crowd, saying some goodbyes there.
Well, he's no longer a hostage himself. In fact, there's only one hostage left today, and that's Ronald Reagan. He will be for the next 4 years the hostage of all those unrealistic expectations of everyone in the country that he will either make the government more efficient or cut it, that he will deliver this service and reduce that service. He is now the hostage for the next 4 years of all of the unmet expectations that surround the presidency.
It's quite interesting to me what a sort of greening period of transition is for an incoming president. I remember very well the transition period of President Carter and then this transition period. It's quite easy to get things done during a campaign, it seems to me. Very easy to balance budgets, very easy to cut taxes, very easy to build up your nation's defenses and at the same time not sacrifice other things. You always notice during the transition period it becomes less and less easy, I suppose.
Well, the great fight against inflation opened here today, and inflation won the first round with the cost of Reagan's inauguration exceeding his budget, and they're having to go out, as you said earlier, with Walter and raise some more money. And that's just one example of the gap between the rhetoric and reality. I hope Reagan succeeds as president. We have not had a successful president in so long that it is time for some things to happen. The American people want some things to happen. The real test is whether or not he defines those sacrifices for us in such a way that we rise to the challenge. I thought he was quite stirring in his speech about the sacrifice of the young man who lies now in the cemetery across the Potomac. The real question he didn't ask is, what do we all have to give up now to avoid losing everything in the future?
Bill, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm told that Bill Plant is with Mrs. Reagan now. Bill?
Yes, Bob. Mrs. Reagan and her daughter Patty have just stopped to chat briefly on their way to the luncheon, describing some of the feelings that she had.
I just, you've known me a long time. I go from day to day and one step at a time.
Do you remember a conversation we had in Detroit as to what kind of First Lady you intended to be? And you said, don't ask me that.
Yes, I do.
I'm asking now.
Myself.
Just you as you have always been. What advice did you give your husband today about dress, about speaking, about anything?
I'd never heard the speech before today. Never read it.
You weren't one of the ones who was privileged to hear it in advance.
No, I wanted to hear it today for the first time.
Tell me again what you thought as you heard it, as you sat there.
I just thought it was a wonderful speech.
And what did you tell him at the end? Do you call him Mr. President now?
I think I'll call him the same thing as I always have.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Reagan.
Thank you, Mrs. Reagan.
Now back to the people.
Bob?
So Mrs. Reagan has some thoughts, kind of saying what you kind of thought you might say, Bill Moyers.
I have great sympathy, Bob, for presidents' wives. I mean, it's hard to be anybody's wife, but much less a woman who has to play the role with the President of the United States. They're asked all of these questions, and if they make the wrong statement, they put their foot in their mouth. If they don't make a statement, they're called dumb. I think it's a role from which we have expectations that very few people can meet. I really think we've had women who occupy that position who've done better than we men might have if it had been reversed. It's a very excruciating job.
After all, they are not elected officials, and sometimes we tend to treat them as such, I suppose. We expect them to be very glib. We expect them to have an answer for everything. As a matter of fact, they do quite well.
Oh, I think so.
As a matter of fact, they have. They have in recent years. We are waiting now for two things to happen, for President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan to join a luncheon that's being held in Statuary Hall of the Capitol. We'll be seeing pictures of that. You don't often see that, but this year the Reagans have decided to allow photo coverage, and along with congressional leaders, so we'll be seeing that. We're also waiting for President Carter to leave Andrews Air Force Base and return home to Plains, Georgia. Of course, we're also waiting any word that we might get on the hostages. To repeat, as best we know, the Iran working group at the State Department and several of the wire services, other sources, CBS News sources, are saying that the planes are off the ground in Iran. This, of course, is Air Force One. Of course, it's no longer Air Force One. It is the plane that Mr. Carter is riding on. Air Force One is only the aircraft, only called that when the President of the United States is aboard.
There are some events, Bob, that carry their own excitement, and the cameras convey far more than we commentators can, and that's one right there.
Now, this is the State Department team aboard this plane. This is not the plane that Mr. Carter will be aboard, and we're going right behind it there. Oh, you're so that's so true, Bill. I was at Andrews Air Force Base when Richard Nixon left for the last time. It's a scene that I still cannot describe.
It describes itself.
A large group of White House aides, Mr. Carter's staffers, close friends, will be returning to Plains with him. The white-haired lady just in front of him, Esther Peterson, who served various governments in a variety of consumer posts.
The President gave her a Medal of Freedom the other day.
Did indeed. Vice President Mondale, Mrs. Mondale, of course.
Well, as a former White House official, I can tell you, one day everybody answers your phone calls, and the next day they say, who?
The State Department receiving team, former Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, heading a 30-member team that will go to Wiesbaden to welcome the American hostages back. If all the planning holds, of course, they'll be in Wiesbaden for about a week, going through a kind of decompression, going through briefings, debriefings, complete physical checkups. Also, a team of about 15 psychiatrists will be there to talk to them about how they feel and so forth.
Bob, you've been around Washington the last few weeks. What is Washington saying about the effect on the release of the hostages of the Reagan election and the coming inauguration? Do we in fact owe the release of the hostages to their apprehension about Reagan?
Bill, just a minute. Bill Plant is ready with another report. Let's go directly to him. Bill?
Since they were released.
I just signed one in there. And
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's the one that I promised I would. The one putting a freeze on the hiring
Any
federal
executive
impact.
orders relating to the hostages, sir?
No, nothing of that kind.
Could you just
There's
tell
nothing
us
left to be
whether
said.
the hostage thing is now totally clear as far as you're concerned?
If they cross the border, I mean, let's wait till they're out of that Iranian airspace. Then we know that.
Sir, you said last
Thank
night...
you very much, Mr. President.
Bob Schieffer, we've just made contact in Tehran. Actually, we've had contact for a few moments, but we've just gotten the audio to the point where we can hear it with Tony Alloway, who's an experienced reporter with the Times of London, who has been at Tehran Airport. We've been in touch with him the past few days. He's just moved from Tehran Airport to a nearby telephone. Tony Alloway in Tehran, if you're still hearing us, when the hostages left, what did you see, and did you count 52 hostages?
Well, actually, I didn't see any hostages at all, Dan, because I was watching it from a rooftop vantage point across from the airport. It was pitch dark, of course, so I really have no firm evidence that the hostages were on the plane, but it would be the biggest shock in the world if they weren't on the planes. What did I see? Well, the Revolutionary Guards had prevented journalists from getting anywhere near the places where the hostages were to be put on board the planes ready for takeoff. So I went to my vantage point on the rooftop across from the airport as the light was dimming. And I could see two jets, and I thought they were the Algerian 727 jets, parked at the western end of the runway. I didn't see, but there was also there the small Algerian executive jet, which was used to bring the intermediaries here, and was later used for several shuttles between Tehran and Algiers. For 4 hours, those planes sat there, over 4 hours in fact, sat there on the western end of the airport runway. I could only see in the dark, I could only see the red and white marking lights of the planes. There was a constant traffic of cars to and fro the planes. This might be that they were taking the hostages individually or in small groups to the planes throughout the evening. I can't imagine that they would have left the hostages sitting there for 4 hours in the plane after all their other ordeal. And then at about 10 minutes to 9 o'clock, we began to see a flurry of activity, flashing of lights, all the cars withdrawing and moving back. And then the small executive jet began taxiing down the runway towards the east because the planes had to take off east-west in Tehran. It taxied down, turned, and at 5 minutes to 9 approximately, it winged up into the air and took off, the first of the planes. Shortly afterwards, the first of the Algerian 727s, I could see through my binoculars. It had a white fuselage with a red tail, with a white sort of insignia on the tail. That too taxied down the runway towards the east and swung round. And after a very short time, its landing lights ablaze, it roared along the runway, and halfway along, it too was in the air. Then there was a delay. The third 727 had waited for some time in the western end. It then began taxiing itself down towards the east, but it couldn't get on the runway for a while because an Iranian Air Force plane had to land first. So the last of the hostages, I presume there were some hostages in them, had to wait for the war. The Iranian Air Force plane landed very smartly, got off the tarmac very quickly, and at 9:15 Tehran time, the last of the three Algerian planes began to move, and within a minute it itself was in the air. The hostages were free, and the crisis, we hope, was over.
Thank you very much, Tony Alloway, in Tehran, indicating that the nightmare for the 52 American hostages, at least a part of it is over, that they are airborne. The United States State Department is confirming, it began confirming, we're making telephone calls to the families of hostages, and the State Department now confirms that all 52 hostages are aboard that aircraft. Richard Queen, who was a hostage himself in Iran, is with us in our CBS News studios in New York. Richard Queen, what are you feeling at this moment?
Well, it's difficult to describe. It's tremendous elation. I can recall a conversation I had with my roommate, who was my roommate for a long time, Joe Hall, And I said, well, once we get in that plane is in the air, I will consider this to be over. And Joe said, no, I want that plane first to be out of Iranian airspace. I think that once we see the 52 in Algeria, or hopefully in Algeria, then it'll really mean that this is all over. But we have to first, I think, at least for myself, see the 52 in Algeria.
After 444 days, it's still a little difficult to believe that it actually has happened, is happening.
It certainly is. It seemed like it was never going to end. I was there for 250 days, and I can remember that after a while I didn't even want to know what was going on in the outside world. I didn't even want to think of when it was going to end. And I imagine the others felt that way too, that it just seemed it never was going to end, and it was impossible to try to guess, because the times I tried to guess were all wrong.
Let's refresh our audience's memories, if that is necessary. Richard Queen is 29 years old. He was released July 11th, 1980, on day 251. This is a long time after that. What do you think is going to be the most difficult thing in terms of adjustment for these hostages once they get on the ground in West Germany?
Well, I think one thing that has to be remembered is that there are 52 individuals, and unfortunately that seems to have been forgotten. They're always mentioned as the hostages, what will happen to them. They are individuals, and I know that they will react in different ways. I was able to readjust very successfully, and I certainly hope the others, I'm sure the others will be able to readjust.
Richard Queen, we want to be talking to you later on as part of our CBS News coverage during the afternoon and evening. In the meantime, we're going to go back to Bob Schieffer and Bill Moyers in Washington.
Thank you very much, Dan.
I'm going to...
Hall. Two of the relatives of the hostages, Mrs. Louisa Kennedy and Mrs. Keogh, are at the State Department. We're told they're having a news conference. Robert Shackney is there.
And others of the American team have seen the...
And then you're speaking to the group. Mrs. Keogh already spoke for just a moment.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry. What's that?
Then you come back and tell us a little more.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think...
Now that they're really coming home, are you changed your mind about going to Wiesbaden?
No, not until I talk to my husband, anyway.
Mrs. Kennedy, if I understand it correctly, you're restraining your reaction now because you're not absolutely sure?
I'm not restraining it purposely. Mm-hmm. It's built in. We've learned that.
But you have, I mean, your view is that until you know that the hostages are in the planes and land, you are...
Well, can I say this, that as a student of history, perhaps, not necessarily a great scholar of Persia, but something in my mind makes me think that one of the things they're classically known for, these Persians, is the Parthian shot. And let's just be awfully sure we aren't looking at one.
You have been told what so far by the Iran Working Group?
They are making every confirmation except officially, because they know that planes left the airstrip, the planes said to be containing 52 American hostages. There has been no further word since the planes went into the sky.
What are the plans of the families of the hostages? Is there any plan for the families as a group?
Yes, the families will gather in Washington in the next few days. As soon as there's been some assessment of how long the hostages are going to stay in Wiesbaden, the families will come here and prepare for our private meeting.
Louisa, you said a few days ago that you were fairly certain you were not going to go to Wiesbaden. At least there was a consensus, I think, is the way you put it. You seem
correct.
to be perhaps changing your mind. You say now you may talk to your husband.
No, that's you saying that, not me.
No, you said you're going to talk to your husband first, and then you may go to Wiesbaden?
Well, I'm obviously going to talk to my husband. If my husband...
And there the president will take part, the former president, will take part in a brief welcome home ceremony, and as we've just heard, apparently he's going to turn right around and fly back to Washington for transfer to another plane that will fly him to Wiesbaden, where he will represent President Reagan in greeting the returning hostages, who at this moment are en route to Algiers, where apparently they will transfer to U.S. hospital aircraft, although there's no indication hospital aircraft as such are needed, and fly them to Wiesbaden, where they will remain for perhaps up to a week, maybe longer, in debriefings and medical examinations and sort of a general so-called decompression period before coming on home. At any rate, they are free from Tehran, and they must just about be outside of Iranian airspace at this time. When they have flown outside Iranian territory, then and only then will the United States government officially announce that they have been released. That is the plan as we understand it at the moment. Now, in another 13 or 14 minutes, President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan will emerge from the luncheon up at Capitol Hill, and with Bruce Morton here at our CBS News headquarters in Washington, we will keep an eye on the proceedings this afternoon, the parade down Pennsylvania Avenue, which we have been promised is going to be short and snappy, about an hour's length. It's going to feature young faces. That was the request of President Reagan, the oldest man ever to be inaugurated into the office of the presidency. But that's what he wants. He wanted an equestrian, or at least everyone in knowing his love of good horse flesh, decided he would have like an equestrian parade, and there are going to be some 476 equestrian units in the parade of the total of 8,052 marchers and bands and so forth. It ought to be quite a parade, quite an afternoon. It's a lovely afternoon in Washington. The temperature got up to 55 degrees, and that's the warmest inaugural we've had in a very long time. In recent history, the hottest day was 47 degrees for Lyndon Johnson. But we got 55 degrees today. The rain seems to be holding off, and all in all, it's kind of a relief the way the weather turned out here today. Considering what we've had in the past, it's almost tropical in the nation's capital. Charles Osgood reports on the weather from his inaugural almanac.
Here is a little winter scene from 1909. It just so happens that in that horse-drawn carriage are two presidents of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, the outgoing, and William Howard Taft, the incoming. Remarked Taft to Roosevelt that day, "I always said it would be a cold day when I got to be president of the United States." The truth is, the weatherman has not been kind to many of our presidents. James Polk, according to one account, delivered his inaugural address to a large assemblage of umbrellas. When Benjamin Harrison was sworn in 1889, Grover Cleveland held the umbrella for him, thus establishing at least one constructive function for an ex-president. The Harrison family was not lucky weather-wise. When Benjamin's grandfather, William Henry Harrison, had been sworn in, the weather was sloppy, the wind wet and chilling, killing, in fact. President Harrison caught a bad cold and within a few weeks was dead. There was snow the morning of John Kennedy's inaugural, and glare from the snow blinded old Robert Frost as the poet tried to read. Lyndon Johnson, the vice president, tried to shade the page with his top hat. Perhaps the coldest inaugural day was in 1873, the second inaugural of Ulysses S. Grant. There was sleet, snow, and fierce, bitter wind. But the president rode in an open carriage, fortified by what antifreeze we can only surmise. It was so cold, the band instruments at the Capitol froze. And that night at the ball, people danced in their overcoats. And the food was quick frozen before quick freezing was invented. And canaries, who were supposed to gaily sing for the occasion, froze in their cages. Maybe nature wants to prove to presidents that some things can't be controlled, no matter how powerful you are. At any rate, the welcome mat laid out for many a chief executive has been a soggy one. In 1937, at one of FDR's inaugurals, everybody and everything got wet, except for the presidential seal. It was left covered, quite by mistake. The weather is like the government. As Mark Twain once observed, it is always doing something.
The inaugural parade this afternoon, however, as we told you a moment ago, is going to be in much different circumstances than that, a beautiful day in Washington. The planes left Tehran bearing our hostages at 12:41 and 12:44 this afternoon Eastern Time, we are told. That would be about 9:15 or so in the evening of Tehran time. But they've got about an hour and 20 minutes to an hour and a half to fly across Iranian territory before they are free of any tie with Iran whatsoever at all. That would be about 1:20 this afternoon Eastern Time, or 2:20 this afternoon Eastern Time, I should say, and that is still about a half hour from now. Robert Pierpoint at the State Department has more on the hostage situation. Bob?
Walter, I've been trying to figure out by talking to various people here and doing some calculations about those aircraft, and it would appear, as you suggested, that they could be crossing the border between Iran and Turkey at almost any moment now. And when that happens, there's going to be a big celebration upstairs, but I'll tell you a little more about that later. I think it's important to point out that one of the reasons there hasn't been much information on exactly what those aircraft are going to do is because there's a war on in that area, as you well know, the war between Iran and Iraq. And there's always concern and caution about the movement of aircraft with as precious a burden as these 52 hostages aboard when it's moving in a war zone. So the officials here have disclosed that there will be a refueling stop before those planes go on to Algiers, but they have not said where it's going to be. There will be then an hour or so on the ground at that refueling stop. Then they will fly on to Algiers, and then there will be at least another hour on the ground where they will change planes before they go to Wiesbaden. So by my calculation, if everything went smoothly, they ought to be in Wiesbaden, West Germany, sometime between 10 o'clock and midnight tonight, our time, Eastern Standard Time. Now, when they arrive in Algiers, they are going to be greeted there by former Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher. Mr. Christopher, who, as we all know, has spent a great deal of time and effort in these last 14 months working on the freeing of the hostages, wants to be the first American official to greet them if at all possible, and he is staying there, and his only problem is how he's going to be getting home after the hostages leave, because of course he is no longer now in the government. He may have to hop a civilian airliner and somehow get back to Washington, although I have a feeling that President Reagan will probably supply him with an aircraft to get home.
Well, back here at our CBS News headquarters for this inaugural coverage and the coverage on this day that the hostages were released from Iran. We expect an announcement any moment now that they have crossed Iranian airspace and are safely out of Iran after 444 days of an ordeal such as no innocent people should ever be asked to endure. We were asked a moment ago of Bob Pierpoint whether we will expect television coverage at the Algiers airport when they arrive there, which could be another 3 hours or so from now. And Bob referred us back to our producers, who tell me that there is an Algerian television operation at the Algiers airport. We do expect to have pictures from there. We also were curious as to why President Carter, who would be going to Wiesbaden tonight to greet the hostages on behalf of President Reagan, why he'd be returning from Plains, Georgia here before flying on to Europe, and we have the answer to that now. He's coming back here to pick up the official party, which will include former Secretary of State, Edmund Muskie, and former Secretary of Treasury, William Miller. They're going to, as part of the official party. Who else, we don't know precisely at this time. Some of the early part of the motorcade is already moving down Pennsylvania Avenue now, but at the Capitol, President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan, the official party, are still...
The 40th President of the United States, we have a suggestion. Just for a few minutes, forget the politics, forget the power, and take a look at the perks. You know, the little things which make a president's life sufficiently hassle-free that presumably he will concentrate on the big things. Take transportation. In fact, take it wherever you want. A limo for around town stops, Marine One when you're pressed for time, Air Force One when duties call away from home. If you forget something, chances are that someone will be around to see to it that it gets done. In fact, someone's almost always around. A few people on hand just to be sure you're safe, an aide to remind you that that's Senator Thistlebottom's wife coming down the line, a personal physician on hand should you incur health problems. But what about the rest of the family? Not to worry. We all know housing is tight in Washington, but the provided residence, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, probably will suffice. There are, after all, some hidden features. A large office, several big dining rooms, a staff of 92, a swimming pool out back. President Ford used to enjoy that. And we're told there's more. A tennis court, bomb shelter, bowling alley, and very important this time around, a movie theater. If all that should get boring, there's always the place in the Maryland mountains for a more relaxing time. And if none of this is enough to wipe away the cares, the president can have a night on the town. The box at the Kennedy Center, his for the asking. Or better yet, he can bring fine entertainment home. Leontine Price was a White House guest. Peggy Fleming performed over the holidays. She skated in front of a huge pile of man-made snow, perhaps the most creative perk of the Carter administration, which just goes to show that though it may be the toughest job in the world, there are a few things to brighten it up. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
The Ankara airport reported just a moment ago that the first of the Algerian planes carrying the 52 freed American hostages has left Iranian airspace and has cleared into Turkish airspace. The other plane cannot be far behind. It left just 3 minutes after the first. The Ankara report said that this all happened about 10 minutes ago, 1:53 p.m. Eastern Time, so presumably both planes are now into...
heard they were free. I heard in the car coming down to the parade. I was very, very happy, very relieved that they are finally free, that they're coming back home.
Do you think, along with a lot of the other people here, that the hostages has overshadowed the inauguration?
No, I don't think it really did. I'm glad that it's all over. It gives President Reagan a chance to start anew. I don't think it really overshadowed it. I think it was unfortunate that it wasn't resolved a couple of days ago, but I don't think it can take away from this inauguration at all.
Walter, right now we're waiting for the parade. I might mention that one of the hottest buttons around right now, they're going like hotcakes. I was in Washington, D.C. when the hostages were released. It has the date of January 20th. Back to you, Walter.
Thank you, John. Is there a large crowd, John, by the way? Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I could not hear you.
I was saying, is the crowd large? Do you feel that the turnout has been what they anticipated?
Yes, Walter. Along this parade route, in fact, more so than expected. It's just very crowded here. A very docile crowd, though. No problems at all. People are really jubilant about the hostages. Everything is kind of calm, and we're just kind of waiting.
There were some $1 million worth of grandstands built along Pennsylvania Avenue for the parade. That is $1 million worth of seats to be sold, I should say. They're located in various places around 15th Street, Treasury Place, White House Rectangle. The seats started at $15, I gather, John, and increased in cost considerably as you got closer to the reviewing stand. Got up to, what, $100 there, I believe, something of the kind.
Yes.
That could cost $100 to get within spitting distance of the reviewing stand, although don't dare try.
Well, we're not within spitting distance, that's for sure.
Right. The crowd is heavy all along Pennsylvania Avenue for the motorcade, which will begin very shortly, and for the parade immediately thereafter. Later on today, after the parade is all over, after that is before the inaugural balls begin, the skies over Washington are going to be something to behold indeed. This day is going to look like the 4th of July, the bicentennial, and all of that rolled into one. Mariah McLaughlin explains.
The dazzling Saturday night opening ceremony at the Lincoln Memorial, with all the rousing patriotic music and spectacular fireworks, was just a small preview of the $160,000 extravaganza set for this evening. According to one of tonight's producers, as far as fireworks are concerned, we haven't seen anything yet.
I am always a little uncomfortable with superlatives because us entertainment business types are known for a lot of hyping. But I think I can safely say that this will be the most intense fireworks show that the city of Washington has ever seen.
These ordinary hunks of steel pipe, carefully placed, will launch the thousands of aerial bombs and spew out multicolored flames. All safely, it's hoped.
There's less danger now than there used to be, and some in the business would say that maybe some of the romance has gone out because not too many years ago a show like this would have to be launched by literally dozens of men armed with torches running around and individually igniting each of these 4,600 shells that we're using. But in the last few years they've now come up with an electronic firing system which does a couple of things. First of all, it eliminates some of the danger because the men don't have to be right next to the guns as these shells are going off. And secondly, it allows us to choreograph because we actually fire to electronic commands, all pre-recorded on the tape right with the music so that everything is synchronized. And now the gentleman that's the master pyrotechnician is sitting at a control panel as if he were working for NASA and pushing buttons, which, as I say, might take a little of the romance and the danger away, but it makes for better programming.
And judging from Saturday's preview, he's right. McLaughlin, CBS News, Washington.
I saw that spectacular on Saturday night. I think still the greatest fireworks spectacle ever was on in New York over the Statue of Liberty in the harbor of New York on bicentennial night, July 4th, 1976. And they tell us tonight that there are going to be almost twice as many fireworks fired off in half the time on the mall. If that's so, Bruce, it's going to be some demonstration indeed.
Well, it's supposed to be one of the things they had at the Saturday thing that fascinated me were laser beams, not just fireworks and searchlights and all that, but they had laser beams linking the monuments, running from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington. And looking at the videotape, it's a little hard. I'm not sure I know a laser beam when I see one, but you could see occasionally these narrow shafts of light, and I guess that's what that was.
Bruce, I understand that we're working on a legal action that's trying to try to get you up in the front of the bus here for the next inaugural. Sorry, you have a seat back there, but it didn't seem to work out up here.
That's all right.
However, stand by. We've got the great parade coming up and all the rest of this afternoon. The really celebratory aspects of the inaugural are still to come with the parade and the fireworks tonight. And then 8 inaugural balls tonight. That's more than any president's ever had before. And they're going to be very formal, highly decorated. And not only that, but they're going to be carried by closed-circuit television throughout the United States and to Paris. And literally thousands upon thousands of people are expected to participate at just $5 to $15 a head in these other cities by watching on closed circuit the great bands here. And they'll probably see more than anybody here will, because most of the participants here will be at just one of the balls. The President and Mrs. Reagan promise they're going to all 8 of the balls and to a youth dance as well. They're not going to get back to the White House for their first night until sometime in the wee hours of Wednesday morning. But those who are watching on closed circuit are going to see all of the balls and the President and Mrs. Reagan visiting those 8 inaugural balls. Now, there was rain forecast for late this afternoon. It's still hopeful that the parade will beat the rain and that all these participants, particularly the college and high school bands who have come from all over the country at their own expense to participate in this parade, will get to do so without the rain that has been promised for later today. And what that rain and those low clouds might do to the fireworks display that we heard Mariah McLaughlin describing to us a little earlier, we have no idea. CBS News coverage of the 1981 inauguration continues after this pause for station identification.
Quite filled up yet. People have been arriving in huge buses, Trailways and Greyhound buses. They've been letting them off in large groups. Governors, some of the buses rather have said governors, others have said families, and they're filling up the stands. Directly behind me is the central reviewing stand with the bulletproof glass surrounding the area that the president and his family, as you mentioned, will be sitting in. Already in place is the Reagan cabinet. I don't know if you can see some of them, but down in the front row, I have a pretty good view of Caspar Weinberger and Alexander Haig. Henry Kissinger is sitting by himself in the middle, and Edwin Meese, the new chief counselor to the president, is in the group as well. Very few other people that we can recognize are yet here, but many of them will be arriving in cars shortly. Walter, there is a very small demonstration going on behind us in Lafayette Park. I will tell you, before I tell you about the demonstration, that I can't remember seeing so many fur coats in a parade audience lining the streets. And the demonstration is being put on by a group called Animal Rights 1981. One of the demonstrators has a sign that says, "Take back your mink, take back your veal. What made you think animals don't feel?" It's the funniest thing I've seen today. The parade will be shorter than usual. Apparently, Ronald Reagan wanted it to be only 1 hour.
Or National Airport here. People are really very excited about this moment. Leslie, let's work on the arithmetic just a moment now. You're back in junior high, and I'm the teacher, and they're going to march at 110 steps a minute, and that's going to be faster than 120 steps a minute?
I had the same question, but you take longer strides when you take fewer steps, which means you can cover more space, more distance.
So that's
right?
faster.
Right. So that's faster.
I'm going to get somebody to explain that to me later.
Well,
Okay.
one more time. If you take fewer steps, you can take longer strides. So says my expert here.
But they also said that the steps were going to be shorter, I think.
No, I think
No.
it's fewer steps per minute, but longer strides.
I tell you what, when the space shuttle gets up, allegedly on March 18th, let's talk about the fact that in order to go faster around the Earth, you've got to go slower.
All right.
That's one of the interesting facts of life. Thank you, Leslie. We'll be
Thank
coming
you.
back frequently this afternoon. You're our co-partner as we cover this parade with Bruce Morton and I up here at our control center, and you right there at that vantage point across from the review. Expected just 35 minutes late, however. Perhaps it was drafting a statement or something else. At any rate, they're 35 minutes late. Doesn't make any great difference unless it starts raining 35 minutes earlier than it might have otherwise. But at any rate, there they are on the steps of the east side of the Capitol. As you see, here begins the movement of the Military Guard of Honor, which he will review in a break from previous inaugural programs from these east steps. And after that short review, supposed to take about 8 minutes, passes by, he will get into the car for the drive to the White House.
Walter, Bill Moyers was talking about President Reagan and what kind of a president he's likely to be. One of the men who knows him really well is his former campaign manager, John Sears, who's always said that at least one problem a President Reagan wouldn't have is insecurity, that whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not, Reagan knows who he is. His vanity is not particularly sensitive. He's not worried about status and prestige full time. And that may help him take this somewhat more relaxed attitude to the job. He's a very different kind of man from, say, a Richard Nixon. It made Sears think that he might do quite well because, you could argue that Carter proved that you can't do all the reading anyway, and maybe a little more relaxed attitude is what you need.
I suppose some of that comes, don't you, Bruce, from the training as an actor. That has to do one with a certain sense of self-confidence.
Self-confidence, and also you have to be willing to delegate. The cameraman is important to the movie, the director is, and the actor plays his role, and people say, well, Reagan's movie was good or bad, but in fact, a lot of people made the film.
Go ahead, Wayne. I'm ready and waiting. Looks like we're going to come on your right-hand side, it looks like. We're going up into behind the Capitol.
President being briefed by a military aide to each of the units in this Guard of Honor that he is reviewing. This is the area that previous inaugurals has been filled with seats and the press stands and the television stands as the inauguration took place there on this area where the steps are and the president is now standing.
And as I think you mentioned earlier, Walter, it's normally a parking lot. It's where if you're, I guess, a somewhat important person, a congressman, say, you get to park your car.
Mr. and Mrs. Bush, of course, Vice President of the United States. Fife and Drum Corps from the 3rd Infantry. They're part of the 3rd Infantry Brigade as well, are they not, Bruce?
Yeah. One of the nice things about Washington ceremonials is that there are some of these units where they've kept the old uniforms and the old music, and it really dresses it up some. They're based, I think, at Fort Myer, which is just across the river in Virginia.
Carter, who has been briefing him on the parade, commander of the review section. He is going down the steps to get into the car for the drive motorcade down the parade route, down Constitution Avenue, then Pennsylvania Avenue, around the Treasury Building at 15th Street and on to the White House and the reviewing stand for the parade. The President and his lady, the nation's First Lady, ride back to the White House together. Going up to the White House, the tradition has been that the incoming president and the outgoing president ride together, but not their wives. Going back, the wives do ride. That is ever since Mrs. William Howard Taft did. Before that, the outgoing president recently went back to the White House as well, making his departure from Washington. But Teddy Roosevelt was going directly to the train station. There was an empty seat, and Mrs. Taft said, by golly, she was going to ride back with the president.
Capitol steps, preceded by a television truck and a big truck with photographers aboard. And now, if I can't see exactly what we're seeing on the picture, but the limousine with its walking Secret Service escort on either fender. There you see President Reagan now and Mrs. Reagan, President Reagan waving to the crowd as he pulls out directly east of the dome of the Capitol of the United States. Waving now in the direction of the cameras, and the presidential part of the inaugural motorcade now is indeed underway, Walter.
Just about as late as the new president has left the Capitol that I can recall. It used to be that they turned around right after taking the oath and giving the inaugural address and went right back to the Capitol, although they walked or rode horseback or something. In those early days, McKinley, I guess back in 1896, was the first one to stay to have lunch with some of the congressional leaders up at the Hill before going back, but there's never been delayed this long. Sometimes back in the old days, there wasn't any return, really, ceremony at all. The president gathered a few friends around and went back to his hotel and had dinner or lunch or whatever was the kind in those very earliest days. Thomas Jefferson had just walked back to his hotel, which was up here at the Hill somewhere in 1801, I think, and had had dinner with a group of his cronies.
Well, it was boarding house, and he just took a few friends back, and I don't know, they expanded the table a little somehow. And then, of course,
picked
you
up
had
the check, I'm sure.
The Andrew Jackson shambles, when apparently about half the city came back to the White House and tore it up.
They called it a mob, and I guess it really was. It was so bad that Jackson finally had to climb out a window to escape from his own inaugural there at the White House, as we all know, having read that story in our early history books, I suppose. We're told now on the hostages, by the way, that the planes will refuel, as we had reported earlier, at the U.S. Air Base outside Athens, not the Athens airport, although the base is adjacent to the airport there. No reporters are going to be allowed on the base. The Americans are going to remain aboard their aircraft during refueling there and then fly on to Algiers. It has been confirmed definitely by the U.S. Air Force that they will be taken to Algiers. Two DC-9s, the U.S. Air Force will be prepared to pick up the hostages at Algiers. They're going to leave very shortly. They're leaving about now from Frankfurt for the 2.5-hour flight to Algiers. They will beat the Algerian airline planes there and will have been refueled, so the transfer should not take very long for the hostages then to be on their way to Wiesbaden, probably getting there around midnight tonight. President Reagan was supposed to exit the Capitol. By the way, we had a report that he'd gone out another exit. Well, he was supposed to exit the Capitol through Statuary Hall and the Rotunda, but he did take another route. We still don't know why. We don't know why that long delay either. He went to the East Front where the honor guard awaited him, of course. He did appear there as planned. But the reporters stationed along the planned route felt that maybe it was just that the president wanted to avoid questioning at the time about the hostages, and it could have been that. That's where Bill Plant was standing, and that's why he was reporting to it that he'd gone out another exit. He did indeed. He did not follow the route that was planned through the Capitol, although he eventually exited the Capitol building through the same doors planned. The CBS News coverage of the 1981 inauguration continues after this pause for station identification. The city of the inauguration of Ronald Reagan as our 40th president, and the city of the day that is rejoicing over the release of the American hostages from Iran. They are on their way now out of Iranian airspace, on their way to Athens, where their Algerian airliners will be refueled, and then to Algiers, where they'll transfer to American Air Force planes for the trip to Frankfurt, where they'll get there around perhaps midnight tonight. A wild guess at this particular moment. And along the parade route, you see the Secret Service walking alongside President Reagan's car as it leads the motorcade back down Constitution Avenue toward Pennsylvania Avenue, where it will follow the route of presidents through the canyon of federal buildings back to the White House. Security as tight as it has been since the Kennedy assassination. It's always been tight for the presidents, of course, but as the Social Security, the Secret Service people say, there is no way to guarantee these things. There may be a new help for President this year in just recent years, designed originally for Dr. Henry Kissinger for his trips to the Middle East and his shuttle diplomacy. It's a very lightweight. It can be made into cloth, into a suit or into an undergarment, exceedingly lightweight, undetectable under other clothing, and they say it can stop a .357 Magnum at very close range, which means it's an exceedingly effective bulletproof garment. We have no confirmation, I say, that President Reagan is wearing that, but it seems unlikely he would not be. We do know that several of the governors here ordered such clothing, and we're wearing it today. Banking establishment in New York, and then, of course, they went down to resounding defeat in '64. But here the inheritor of the Goldwater mantle has finally made it to the presidency some 16 years later.
Well, there are people out there, of course, who've said all their adult lives, Walter, that there was a conservative majority in the country, and they were never right until this year. I do have to say one thing. They always used to talk about limousine liberals, but the fact is that it's limousine conservatives. I have never seen as many chauffeur-driven cars in Washington as I have this week. They're just wall-to-wall limousines through this town. The traffic's been impossible for 4 or 5 days now, and it's the day of the gas guzzler. They're really just all over.
And as Leslie reported to us a moment ago, she'd never seen so many fur coats at an inaugural before. The inauguration committee and Bob Gray, Wick, who had put this committee together, the co-chairman, Bob Gray, a superb public relations man, a long-timer in Washington, they put it together with the intention that it was to exude class. Mm-hmm. They meant it to do so, and it has. It's been a very classy 3 or 4 days around here, far different from the People's Inaugural of 1976, 77 for Jimmy Carter.
You said earlier, I think, that this was the most expensive one ever, which it is. They say the final bill may be as much as $8 million, but they also say that they are determined to end up in the black, as the Carter people did 4 years ago. Carter inaugural finished with a surplus, and in fact set up a fund with it in a bank so that the Reagan inaugural people had some startup money that was bequeathed them by the Carters. And I talked to Bob Gray a few days ago, and they're hoping to do very much the same thing, add to that fund a little bit.
Susan Spencer, as we said, and we saw a moment ago, is in the motorcade, right? I think the camera that maybe her camera is showing us now, there she is. Susan, can you hear us, and can you talk to us?
Yes, Walter, there's quite a bit of noise as we go by the crowd. We're in the unfortunate position right now of being among the first cars. The new president, is considerably behind us. People are lined up about 25, 30 deep. For the most part, it's a very young crowd, pretty much what the new president wanted. And we did pass at the top of the hill. One of the first things he would have seen as he came out of the Capitol was an anti-nuclear protest, another anti-draft protest, but there really wasn't much noise coming from either of those.
Let us review what has been happening here today in Washington and in Iran, because half of today's story comes from Iran. While the president was being inaugurated just a couple of minutes before the scheduled hour of noon at the west side of the Capitol here in Washington, just shortly after that, about 40 minutes after that, the first of two Algerian transport planes carrying the 52 hostages departed from Tehran airport. Just a little over an hour and 10 minutes after that, Ankara airport in Turkey confirmed that they had passed into Turkish airspace, and our hostages, after 444 days of captivity, are free of the Iranians outside of Iran and on the way to Athens, where they're going to refuel at the American Air Force Base at one end of the Athens airport, international airport there. They will not leave the aircraft at Athens. They'll be there at about 5 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern Time, another hour and a half or so. They would only refuel. They will not leave the aircraft and will fly on another couple of hours, 2.5 hours or so, to Algiers, which means they'll be getting there about 7:30 or 8 tonight. There they will transfer to two DC-9s being sent from the American Air Force Base at Rhine-Main outside of Frankfurt, Germany. That's a 2.5-hour flight. The planes will be there waiting for them. We have no word as to how long they will be stalled in Lafayette Place, Lafayette Park, across from the presidential reviewing stand. Leslie?
Walter, the motorcade is coming into what has to be described as the high rent district here in the parade route.